Hello, everyone, and welcome to Praxi Room 101. I'm Ethan, and today I have the opportunity to ask CEO Andrew Ahn about AI and data classification. If you're anything like me, you've seen countless examples of how AI is changing the way our world works, and today I just hope to learn a little bit more about the underlying processes that make it all possible. So, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to meet today, and if you're ready, we can jump right in.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Happy to be here with you today. Yeah, we can definitely cover some kind of the fundamentals, but the fundamentals are really important, and a lot of times people put the proverbial cart before the horse. So this is, really relevant today as it was 10 years ago.
Absolutely, absolutely. So my first question for you is, when you're creating an AI machine learning model, what's the first step?
Yeah, so obviously, um, let's make some assumptions. Let's say you kind of know what question you really want to ask, and sometimes that's not always the case. So let's say you do know the question you want to ask, and you kind of have a rough idea of the type of at least answer you want. Um, so if you have those two things, then the next really critical step, and this is a step that obviously Praxi focuses on, and I think that's perhaps not focused on enough, is actually the classification. You know, the adage of garbage in, garbage out is actually more true today than it has ever been. In fact, it's substantially more so in the case of AI because um, those foundational elements of good data versus maybe not so good data get magnified when you put AI in the mix.
Definitely.
The first step would be to get the right data.
Absolutely. And I know you had mentioned data classification and how important that is. And, there are a lot of industry terms that are circulating between, data classification, data curation, and data labeling. And so I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about the differences between those terms.
Yeah, so I mean, these are not hard and fast definitions. These conceptual ideas are changing, but there are some working differences. So labeling is just literally that. There's a thing, you give it a label, it has a relationship. It could be in a knowledge graph, a name value pair, but it's a thing, you give a label to the thing, so you give it a name. Classification has a little more structure. So there are preconceived notions of certain things that might be identity or PII. And you could say those are sensitive things. So you would classify those things as sensitive. So you could label something like address or a name, and it can also have a classification. Hey, that's sensitive. That's like somebody's data. So they can be used together, but they're not really the same thing. Labeling doesn't have this notion of a grouping or an order to them, whereas classification necessarily makes a distinction between one label versus another label. So another way to look at it is labels are all at the same level. Classifications are grouping, so there's a higher order of organization.
Gotcha. And how do those all pertain to the idea of data curation?
So curation, that's a really good question, and it's a nice flow. So curation is yet another level of grouping. So curating for a specific question, like we talked about earlier, like if you're talking about wine reviews, you don't want everything. You want things that are shaped or from the point of view of that question. Likewise, if you're talking about health measures and bed utilization rates at a hospital, and recidivism rates from these codes of reentry, which rate how an insurance company does or provider. Those are fundamentally different things. So you want to curate the data and organize it for different constituencies, right? Now, if you have a sophisticated enough model, they can be connected some way, right? There are consumers, there are buyers, right? There are experts, right? And so that can lend itself to a knowledge base or knowledge graph. But really, the notion of putting everything into this gigantic knowledge graph really is academic, right? By and large, as long as you get the scope correct for your problem, it doesn't need to encompass everything. And actually, it's detrimental if you have too much noise. The knowledge graph will look cool in a visual, but is actually, practically speaking, not very helpful and will slow down um, the utilization of turning that knowledge graph into, let's say, a graph database, right? So there are some kind of some curation components that need to happen to get the most value out of your data. So not just classifying it, but curating it. So things that are relevant. So you may want to curate also for another dimension, which is data quality. So let's say in a hypothetical case, you want to curate data for a certain topic, but you also only want a certain level of quality. So a funny example would be a marketing group that is doing outbound marketing. They want to get curated data for prospective customers or customers that might be potentially leaving, and you want to send them a renewal offer. Well, you only want to use really good data because to make that outbound campaign or effort, it costs money for everyone. And so in order to go through with those actions, it has a necessarily a financial component to them. And so you want to spend your money wisely, obviously, and get high effectiveness. So you want a higher level. Strangely, if you're a compliance person, the things that are 100% in the area of compliance, they probably already know. So when they're classifying data and curating the data, they'll probably also want to know, because they're paranoid, they want to know things that have maybe a lower threshold of data quality or confidence, but they still want to know about it. So where the marketing people may want only super clean, super awesome data that's like 80% or better, the compliance people, in a strange way, would actually probably take something substantially less. If it's 25% like legitimate, meaning it's a complete data set with maybe a little dirt, and it has some things in there that might have sensitive data. If we're only 25% confident that that's the case, they still want to know. So it's very interesting. So you can have the same amount of data with different levels of confidence levels for data quality or other measures, and you're curating them for different audiences. And that makes the work of the analytic side, the next step, much faster and much more effective. And the whole process becomes faster. So curation really is important because to get from pure labeling to kind of rough groupings of classification and then curating it for the actual question and the actual user that's going to ask them that question and consume the answer, that curation component is really important. A lot of times it is kind of assumed into the process and gets hidden, but it's actually there. It just might be called something else, but it's very critical. So there's your long answer to the difference between those three big buckets.
Definitely. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting what you had mentioned about the idea of data with a little bit of dirt in it and how that
Yeah.
would impact the quality. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to what examples of dirt in data might look like.
Sure. So um, it depends, as we mentioned previously, on the curation aspect of it and the type of question you're asking. If you're looking for precise answers, then you need to have precise data, right? So you're never going to increase the resolution of your answer from the resolution of the sources. So if you have fuzzy, not great data, you're going to have fuzzy, not great answers. That's just the way it is. So what you want to do is in the curation step or the classification step, you only want super ultra clean data. But sometimes that's not necessary. You might want to get a notional direction. Instead of having a precise number of how many beds were vacant at this hospital, you know, how many claims were filed against this particular financial or insurance instrument that we created? How many people bought this life insurance policy? Like those are precise answers and you need precise questions. But sometimes you just want to know like, hey, is that notionally a good thing to do? And what that would mean would be like, hey, we're losing a lot of customers, and we're an insurance company. We're losing a lot of insurance customers, and specifically, we're losing them in this area. And notionally, these are the top three or the top 10. Does it matter if number 8 is in front of number 7? Is number 6 actually number 9? It doesn't matter that much. We just need to know the top 10 reasons, right? And in that case, you can have a little bit of maybe not the best or clean data, right? Do we need a precise number for those types of things? Probably not. And we might want to ask questions like what percentage or what demographic bracket is it in? Do we need a specific age of the type of customer we're losing? Probably not, but we need to know if they're, older customers, younger customers. So one of them would be, let's say, renter's insurance, because there's a startup and they have this brand new algorithm. They know that most people don't file claims against their rental insurance policy. So they're undercutting us. And the demographic is young adults out of college, young professionals. So those are notional things that are very helpful from a business perspective that we can act upon as an insurance carrier. But we don't need precise answers. So those would be two different cases.
Gotcha. And so you had mentioned, data curation and how it's important for driving these sorts of insights. How does dark data and gray data fit into that picture of clean data and finding the dirt in your data sets?
Oh, that's really great. A great question. So there's no way you're gonna. So, Rumsfeld had a really funny, or not a funny, but very infamous analogy that he made in an Errol Morris documentary, which was, knowledge comes in three different big buckets: the known stuff you know about, the known unknown stuff you don't know, and then the other stuff, which would be the dark data or potentially gray data, which is the unknown unknown. So from a business continuity and strategic point of view, it's that third bucket that really gets you, because you have no control over that. You cannot plan for that. If you know that you have data that you haven't kind of gone through, at least you know what it is. You can kind of get a rough shape and size of it, and then make a plan to curate that data. But if you have the unknown, like how can you prepare for that? You can't. So that third bucket is the thing that gets you. And how does it get you? Well, the basic thing is that businesses that are business like data driven, they can't react to the unknown data because you don't know about it, right? There might be new developments. There might be trends in consumer sentiment or activity that you just don't know. And because of that, you might be making wrong decisions for your product line that's going to come to market 6 months from now. So you need to align those two things. So that might be one of it. But the legal component might be things like, is there information in that data that could have a legal exposure? And a good example of that is that in a former life, I went to Michigan, Detroit, and worked with a big domestic automobile manufacturer, which I'm not going to name. They were doing an autonomous driving program, and their sensors would pick up a bunch of data. But there was so much data in these sensor streams, they didn't know what to do with it. So they just parked it somewhere. And a legal question would be, well, how long do we keep it? There are no rules governing that, right? This was a big manufacturer's data set. They owned it, right? They collected it. So they actually have responsibility for that data. And what does that mean? Well, if they collect the data and their algorithms based upon that data produce some kind of driving protocol or workflow or system, but they made a mistake and the data they collected would show that they made a mistake and they didn't do anything about that mistake that they should have caught, are they in legal peril? And it's not clear, but possibly and probably to some degree. So maybe you should delete that data if you're not using it. So what you want to do from a curation standpoint is put a limit. And so no one person has to make a decision on the data. You just have a policy. And then as it reaches a certain uh, life cycle, the data gets expired, it gets deleted. So the dark data may not be like some amorphous data set out there. It could actually be within the company already. They just haven't picked through it, right? So that's something that is of great concern. Another thing that you mentioned that's really cool is this notion of gray data, which we don't talk about. And actually, that can be just as dangerous because that's data you know a little bit about, but you don't completely know well. And because of that, you may make false assumptions about that data and act on those assumptions, right? So if there's like data with a lot of fidelity, and then you summarize that into a report and you act on the report, well, that's what you've been doing for 20 years. That's great. But what happens is that the resolution of that data, that the lower level before it got turned into a report, actually was capturing something. Maybe it was a customer complaint. Hey, when it's really hot, my brakes don't work. And when it's hot and it's over 102 degrees, they really don't work. But overall, since I live in a cool climate, it only happens every once in a while. And those comments maybe never made it to some kind of summary report because it was an outlier. But if it's persistent, it becomes a deal. And so you would just never get that. That could also be true for pharmaceuticals research, right? And what happens over time is that weak signal can be lost, right? And that's what we mean by gray data, right? It might be data sets that you're using all the time, but because you've been using it the same way, you don't really know about it, the details of it, right? There could be small, subtle changes that they don't pick up. And this is really critical because AI work and AI ML work in general tries to go to the source data and removes that intermediate layer. And they would be able to pick up this weak signal, whereas the traditional roll-up reporting summary style would not. But because you've been doing this all this time, you just leave it alone. And that will be kind of a not obvious form of gray data. Another form of gray data is that there's a lot of data and you just kind of like read the top of it. That's obvious, right? That's something that's pretty self-explanatory. But that might be an interesting way to look at gray data.
Yeah. So it sounds like dark and gray data have a pretty big impact on, you know, the accuracy of your insights as well as if they might
Oh,
be reductive in a lot of senses. And
mhm,
I was reading a study about how, 55% of an organization's data might be dark. So that
mhm.
seems like a very large chunk of a company's data that is stuck in that third kind of Rumsfeld bucket of
Uh-huh.
unknown unknowns. So I was wondering if you could give me some more sort of real life examples of what dark data might look like and why it's a challenge for those enterprises.
So before I answer that, let me kind of throw another stat at you. So, I mean, if you like dumpster dive into like McKinsey reports, there's all these really cool stats, and sometimes it's hard to make sense of it. Another stat, though, that is relevant would be the amount of data an organization actually deems as critical to make decisions. And it's only 15%. So that's kind of at odds with kind of that other stat of like known data. So let's say you have this big pie, right? You only need a small sliver to actually make business decisions. But the obvious next question is, which sliver? Is it the dark data that you don't know about? Is it hidden in like under your nose under this gray data area? You don't know. So that's how they get together. So it may be that your dark data truly is completely irrelevant and not necessary for your business operations from day to day, even strategically, right? Not just tactically, but strategically. It's possible, but there's no way to know. And the reality is it may not be relevant in degrees, right? So I was at a insurance conference, and actually a large insurance carrier put up a slide, which is all insurance companies are data companies. And the reason why they put that slide up there is that over time, because of the way business is driving maniacally to in terms of collecting and processing information, at some point, all the data that all the people in a specific sector, let's say insurance companies have, will be roughly the same, right? And if it's roughly the same, what is to distinguish one insurance carrier and their products from another one? It's really how fast they can look at that information and analyze it, create models, and create products from those that, are helpful to both the consumers and also profitable, right? So that speed in which you go through that cycle is really, really important. And so dark data not only has this kind of sort of Damocles thing where, like, at any point it could be this big legal suit, it could also have another impact, which is it's a part of their existential like mission to get that data quickly, because if they don't, they will disappear and become irrelevant. And this sounds like it's kind of maybe overstating something that hasn't happened yet, or is not like relevant yet, but it actually is. And the quarterly report of a company and profits is a trailing indicator, obviously, of 3 months, right? But it might take several quarters before they realize the root cause of it. The root cause is now. The root cause was 6 months ago. And the root cause is you're getting a bunch of data, you're sitting on it, and it's taking too long to analyze it. So that dark data, from a business perspective, to slightly change the way you ask that question, has an existential impact that, if ignored, will be the death of a line of business or a company, right? Your business model can be completely upended and you may not know it, right? And so that is the other risk of dark data. Another example of dark data that kind of relates to this is the accessing of perhaps non-traditional data sources or additional data sources. Most companies that deal with data have plenty of data to go through. So the problem is not getting more, it's probably processing it, right? So they don't even think about getting new data sets. But in the insurance space, getting non-traditional sources is really important. Maybe there's a higher resolution of weather data and flood and fire prediction that a university just came out with. That's not your data, but if you talk to that university, they will lease it to you or rent it to you. But because it's a university, they don't want to be tied to one insurance company, so they'll lease it to all comers. So that means you need to get this data, which might be in a weird format that you've never seen before. You need to analyze it, relate it to the data you already have, and then do your actuarial processes to accommodate that, right? And maybe that means you don't sell any more policies in California, which unfortunately is happening, right? So these are things that are really critical and time sensitive. So this dimension of time is only going to accelerate. And that has a very, very tightly coupled relationship with this dark data, right? You need to get through it, and find that critical 15% of, of key insights to make your business processes and those decisions.
Definitely. Yeah. So you had mentioned a lot of the sort of risks associated with a company neglecting their dark data or going about, figuring out their dark data in the wrong way. I was wondering what some of the benefits companies can expect to gain from learning more about their dark data.
Yeah, so I mean, this is the part where Praxi can come in. So this is a unmitigated plug for our company. I started the company with this notion that the foundation of all analytic work, especially AI ML work, is around properly classified data. So if you want to get high quality data with high data quality, or you can get a little bit of a dirty data, or there's this other stuff that you need to go through that you need to quickly curate. So that is the foundational element to any process. So a lot of companies and a lot of technology companies focus on the shiny new AI thing, right? But in order to make that thing work properly, you need to feed it the right fuel. The source has to be accurate, right? It's like buying a Ferrari and giving it really bad gas, right? Like that's not a good idea. You're not going to get the best output. And ultimately, you might have big, service problems by using the incorrect fuel, right? So that's kind of a rough analogy in terms of how you would feed the machine, right? And that is often overlooked. And I think that's where I think the big incremental gain is now. In terms of analytic workflow, being able to use AI workflows in the cloud, being able to do really cool LLM work, whether it's through RAG or specialized generative AI LLMs, it's all predicated on getting good data, right? Like that's the thing that's missing. So I think what we're doing around dark data, gray data is actually really critical and is being underserved right now. And I think people are waking up to it. So, 5 years ago, when I started the company, there was a lot of explaining of the problem set and convincing people they actually had a problem, which is generally not a good idea for a startup. They should already be feeling that pain. But that has changed now. And so this sector is finally getting the attention that it's due. The innovation on the higher part of that stack is already happening and it's reaching a point where it's starting to produce really good results. But the innovation is slowing down because it's maturing, right? So if you want to get advancement, you have to go further down or much further up. But right now, the obvious thing is just making sure that the foundation is solid, right?
Awesome. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Thank you so much for your insights. We're going to go into a little bit of an intermission, and then I'll be back with a couple more questions for you.
Good.
All right.
So that was really good, Ethan. It was very good, kind of add-on questions. So that's fantastic. I hope I don't give away too much and obviate questions later. So the next question though is, what are the benefits of classification? Well, we could do that. We might just jump to how Praxi differs, and that might be a good way to go.
Just cut these first two guys?
No. Just cut the very first one, like this.
Gotcha. Yeah, we already kind
No,
of.
you can ask that. You can ask that question. Just leave it as is. It's fine. I'll just skip through it. That's fine. All right, let's get started. So pretend this is a brand new segment and say, hey, we're back, blah, 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 blah.
All right.
Okay.
Hey everybody, we're back with Room 101 here with CEO Andrew Ahn, here to ask a couple more questions about data classification and automating that sort of process. So my first question for you is, what are some of the benefits of automating data classification?
What the benefits, as we mentioned in the previous session, really is to build a firm analytic foundation, not only for your generative AI work, but also for existing processes, making ad hoc analytics better. And one of the reasons why I named the company Praxi was, besides the fact that praxis was taken, is it's based upon this Greek notion, which is there is this academic, classical, abstract thinking that we ascribe to the ancient Greeks, but they also had another group of thought, which is the art of the doing, right? So, what good is a fisherman that doesn't catch fish? What good is AI that doesn't give you something actionable that's actually intelligent? So we're really predicated on getting valuable, practical, usable results from AI. And we think the best way to do that is to start with good classification. And we do that by focusing on a specific use case. So we narrow the scope, and that allows us to go deeper. And that's kind of our difference. And that's what most customers do. Customers don't want a general purpose curation solution that does everything, because as soon as they buy it, they're going to specialize it for their use case, which is not a insignificant activity, and it could actually take quite a long time, which is often not appropriately accounted for when they deploy a solution. So one of the things that we do is we classify data within a certain set of scope guidelines, guardrails for a use case. Let's say insurance, property and casualty, life and retirement, or healthcare, specifically around CPT codes. So by doing that, we're able to provide a practical way to deploy AI quickly, effectively, and usefully.
Absolutely. And a lot of the industries that Praxi is involved in deal with a lot of PII or sensitive data. And so I
Mhm.
was wondering, how does Praxi's approach of really scoping in on a very specific industry and making an industry specific model, how does it enable these companies to feel safer about using that product versus just a sort of broad strokes data
Sure.
classification model?
No, that's a really great, insightful question. And so if you look at the insurance space, you can get a lot of useful information by just using, ChatGPT. ChatGPT, the latest version is really very good. But if you want to know something specific about a insurance instrument in a specific area, liability, property coverage in California in this zip code, um, and it's associated with automobiles and it deals with Accord Form 22. That is so specific that a generalized answer is actually useless for an actual insurance professional, right? So by having some kind of orthodoxy, and I kind of don't want to use orthodoxy, but it is. Let's say we use Accord terms, right, and Accord forms, which would be semi-structured data. By using that and pre-training for those, it's just a huge like step forward and leapfrogging in terms of deployment and that practicality, right? So we already talk the insurance language for them, right? And the responses we give, either in search results or RAG answers, are couched in that conceptual language. So it's immediately usable. And that's where, our pre-trained models really come in. So the models are not just a list of semantic meanings of a chord and their empirical manifestations actually in data. It also has governance implications with it. It also has an LLM that's been fine-tuned with that that orthodoxy, as well as having things that are seated in the context so that when you get a result, the appropriate uh, reference information is prioritized. And so your answers are much more authoritative. And we can really reduce hallucinations. And at minimum, that's the maximum. And at minimum, our search results are going to be really awesome, right? Because you're getting what you're looking for.
Definitely. So you had mentioned some of the applications of this automated classification within the context of insurance. Could you
Mhm.
give any more examples of other kinds of organizations that would benefit from automated classification or curation?
Sure. So one of the things that a lot of people do in, let's say, the healthcare space is they need different measures. And one good way would be like CPT codes. So curating data might be thought of as just organizing data, but one of the aspects of data quality that we also check for is duplication, right? So if we have duplicated data, you can overstate some aspects of your data, which would skew your assumptions and also skew your results. So if you have a real-time system and let's say a Netezza or a Teradata solution that has data for current month plus 1 month back, and then you have an analytics zone that has 3 months of data, and then you have an archival zone. The data is actually migrating from the expensive system to the less expensive system. So if your window of analytics is, let's say, 8 months, you're actually going to pull from all three potentially. So there is a period of time when the data, when it makes that hop, it's going to be duplicated. So you may actually overstate the current data 3 times or more than the older data that got rolled off. So just understanding duplication is really, really important before you turn your AI processes and get, valid results to make really critical strategic decisions. So that's really important. In a former life, when I worked in financial markets, you would make a critical report, let's say an insider trading report, it would have 12, 20 different sources. And a lot of times there were intermediate files that were created that are not used and consumed as is. They're used to build a higher level report, which would be the insider trading report. So the data in the insider trading report could actually be replicated or duplicated many, many times for a single report, even in the active system. So it's really important to curate correctly. It's really important to determine what duplicate data is. So you're really getting the best possible like fidelity and cleanliness of your source data so you can get the best possible answer from your analytic process, whether it's just a batch file processing or an ETL job or some analytic work that you're doing with a generative AI solution. So it really is super, super important. And little things like duplication of data can be really important.
Awesome. And I remember you had a really interesting quote from our earlier session where you had
Mhm.
talked about, bad data in means bad results out.
Yeah,
And within the scope of healthcare or insurance, bad results out could have some really serious consequences. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the importance of domain expertise in building your classification models and how those serve as sort of a bulwark against these sort of messy results.
sure, sure. We need to add a little disclaimer here. So the goal of, let's say, Praxi and other analytic tools companies should not be that it gives you this magic crystal ball with all the answers. It should just be a tool to accelerate the decision-making process. So let's say you are working for the military, for the DHA, Defense Health Agency, which is the healthcare for the active military. And you're dealing with things like CPT codes, which they have procedure codes, but they also have a whole nother thing, which is readiness, the ability to maintain a certain level of a squadron to basically go fight, right? To be deployable at any given time. And also the effectiveness of a particular MTF, medical treatment facility, also known as hospital. So let's say you have, I don't know, 57 major hospitals and five of them are trauma centers, right? Like on either coast, right? Based upon your data and your analytics and how well you duplicate them, they would impact key performance measures such as bed utilization, right? Recidivism rates, basically, when you release a patient, how fast do they have to go back in? Did you do a good job in like curing what they had? And so those measures go directly into this other thing, which is, do we keep the base open? Is it useful? And if you don't state it correctly because people don't want to gather the information or is improperly labeled, the outcome could be wrong. They might close a base that shouldn't be closed, or they might be funding a base that should be closed. Likewise, they're not making changes to improve those measures. This is also true for the civilian private sector too. How do you run a hospital? It's really competitive. The costs for care are very high. Technicians, as well as medical professionals, if you don't have good utilization and optimization, it could be a big difference in terms of the profitability of that hospital. And make no mistake, all hospitals have to make money, whether they're nonprofit or not, right? The question is, what compromises do you make to maintain a certain level of profitability, and how much are you after? But they all have to make money. Like they can't all lose money every year forever, right? That's not possible in our world. That's just reality. So the question is to get a firm understanding of the health and effectiveness, financial health and effectiveness of anything is really critical, just so that you can make better decisions. So it's not a crystal ball saying, do this, do that. But okay, if you want to answer that question, here are some stats to help you get there, right? So the really critical target audience that we have are decision makers and data workers. We help them do their work faster for the more mundane, bits of it that might be manual, that might be error prone because they're manual, and it's not scalable because they're manual, right? Even with tools, they're still manual because a human being has to put eyeballs on them. If we can automate as much of that as possible, then that saves their time and their cognitive load to make really important decisions that matter. And so we want to get to that state faster, right? Um, Anywhere from 50 to 80% of a data worker's time is spent curating data. So they're not actually doing anything productive per se to getting the answer. They're just getting the preparation ready. They're dumpster diving for data just to get the rough components to answer the question that they're asking. So if we can automate that part of it and get to the answering the question part, that's a big win for us, right? That's a 2x increase in either capacity or speed, which is huge. So that's where we're focusing.
Definitely. Wow. 80% of the time spent is on manual curation.
50 to 80, it
50
depends.
to 80%. Yeah.
But
So
even
that's,
if you take but even if you take the low end, it's still huge.
yeah, definitely. And you had mentioned that, manual curation, not only is it time consuming, but it can also be error prone. Uh, how does Praxi's model validate that their classifications are accurate?
So we use subject matter experts. And so basically what we can do is assign a curation role to somebody, and we curate and build these models in advance. And so even the novice will get the benefit of the curation of that expert. And we do a lot of this in-house before we even deliver the product. So right out of the gate, it's usable. And then later, as soon as they get it and they get the results, an expert can just fine-tune little bits of it and make it even better, right? So the idea is that the state of curation and labeling increases over time and doesn't have to be recreated for every individual. So everybody will have the benefit of the best person there, right? The person with all that experience. And it gets just moved across. And then they can all do the next thing, which is to make decisions, right? So that's how we can make a difference. And that's why it's so important to have all this stuff done in advance. You know, uh, no shade to consulting agencies that are deploying these generic tools, but their motivation is to sell hours of consulting. We're not doing that. We're selling a solution that's software that's already ready to go. So we don't have to recreate the wheel every time for every new customer because we're not selling hours, we're selling the product. So for us, our model is fundamentally different. So our price to entry is a lot lower, making our product much more accessible to even small to medium-sized businesses that can't afford to hire a big consulting company for a year, and spend $1 million. Like, no, you can buy our tool like on the, get a free trial, put it on a credit card and buy it month to month if you want. So really it's a flip in the way you think about it. And I think this is the right way to go. I think it's actually the only way to go going forward. Time will tell if I'm right. But I think that is the right combination to move forward.
Wow. Super interesting stuff. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and answering some of these sort of baseline questions that I had about, data curation and classification.
Oh, this is really great. Great speaking with you, Ethan. And come take a look at our website, praxi.ai. Um, look forward to talking to you again.